All right, we've got to start with Brexit. Now, what about this argument Jane, that Labour needs to move to a straightforward pro-Remain position from Aditya Chakraborty? It has to be said he's fairly Corbynista on most things.
Well, and I mean, I think what Aditya does brilliantly in this is dissects the bind that the Labour Party is finding itself in, with many of the people that voted Labour voting Remain, except obviously, and he points out the number of MPs in these constituencies where they personally voted Remain, but their constituents did not, many in the North East, as he points out. I mean, I think, you know, Labour is in a bind. I think the Conservative Party is in a bind. We're going to talk later about, obviously, the new independent group. But, you know, this is hard for all these parties who have sort of grown up in a two-party state where they're umbrella groups of lots of different interests. And some of these interests are being pulled apart by Brexit. I mean, I think what Aditya does brilliantly, he talked about that research from the TSA union that shows that it will be Remain voters that will give Labour a bloody nose at the polls if it carries on like this. I mean, his main point as well is talking about second referendum, and that, I think, is within the Labour Party, if not the Labour movement, the idea that trying to sort of work out what is the deal and whether a second referendum is viable will actually at least mean that Labour voters who do back Remain will follow.
I mean, it would be bad news for the Brexit cause, wouldn't it, if Labour hardened its position into a more Remain position?
I think that would be the wrong thing for them to do. And I think Aditya is wrong here to say that those close to Corbyn want to that Brexit is something to be endured. That's what he says. I think a lot of us know very well that Jeremy Corbyn, John McDonnell have always voted against European treaties in Parliament. Seamus Milne, his Chief of Staff, is known for taking a similar point of view. And indeed, there were millions of Labour voters who voted for Brexit. Aditya calls this a Tory project. Well, no, it wasn't. If you look at the Vote Leave campaign, the Vote Leave campaign was a very broad coalition chaired by Gisela Stewart, who at the time was a Labour MP.
There weren't many of them. It wasn't so broad.
Well, that's because the Labour Party in Parliament is so unrepresentative of its voters, and that's a great shame.
Well, I think most of the polling evidence does suggest that something over 2/3 of Labour voters actually voted Remain.
It's between 30 and 40% voted Leave, which is a sizable minority. No, it's not a majority. No, it's not a majority. But bearing in mind that 95% of Labour MPs are pro-Remain, that does show a certain disconnect, I think, between the Labour Party and Parliament.
Which is what I mean, and he brilliantly says that this is an issue, and this is how they're trying to deal with it.
I mean, interesting point he raises is this suggestion that it wouldn't actually bother those Labour Leaver voters too much if the Labour shifted its position. That's what he's saying in electoral terms.
I'm not sure that's true. I'm picking up from Labour MPs, Labour peers, who talk on the doorstep every week to their electorates, particularly further away from London, in the Midlands and the North, that people are deeply concerned about the idea of a Parliament dominated by Remainers telling a country that voted Leave, you got it wrong.
Interesting column from Trevor Kavanagh, basically saying, Jonathan, that you know, do a deal on the backstop and it's all over. Do you think that this is? I mean, I just felt this was Brexiteers sort of waving a bit of a white flag on this one.
I don't think so. I think it's a reminder that Brexiteers are trying to be reasonable in all of this. The backstop is the issue which has been the red line for Brexiteers, because it is a potentially indefinite customs union for the UK and the EU, having to abide by EU rules indefinitely, which would be totally unacceptable. If that can be changed in a legally binding way, then I think probably the deal would get through the House of Commons, and that's what Theresa May needs to persuade the European Union of over the coming days. And it's one of the reasons why it's absolutely vital that no deal is not taken off the table, because if no deal were taken off the table, there will be no incentive whatsoever on the European Union to make a concession on that deal.
Whereas I'm afraid this smacks of everything that people are desperate for Brexit, to the you know, that they don't actually mind if we just crash out without a deal. make it incredibly simplistic. I mean, the line to me, you know, all she needs to do is negotiate a deal over the backstop. 2.5 years on, Jonathan, we're nowhere near.
But these negotiations always go to the wire, and the hard graft is always done at the last minute. That always happens. Adam's been at the summits where this has happened, haven't you?
Yeah, I have indeed. Now, and I still think of that where we'll probably end up on the, 21st of March. That said, we got Boris Johnson's column. Wouldn't want to overlook that. And you've got an interesting theory about this. You think this may be my fault that he's written this column?
Well, I think you had a spat over Twitter last week with his new girlfriend, and I suspect that he may have been reacting to that.
Carrie Simmons.
Yes. In terms of pointing out that people from across the political spectrum are in favour of Brexit, whether they be Conservatives or Labour figures like Tony Benn or Peter Shaw or David Owen from the SDP. Gisela Stewart obviously chaired the Vote Leave campaign. And indeed...
A bit desperate, citing something Tony Blair said in 1983, isn't it?
Well, no, it's a reminder. The Labour Party manifesto in 1983 was in favour of leaving the then European Economic Community. And, of course, Jeremy Corbyn has voted against every single European treaty during his 30-odd years in the House of Commons. So this idea, and it also comes through in the Aditya Chakraborty piece in The Guardian, the idea that Brexit is a solely Tory project is absolute nonsense. It is a project in favour of democracy and sovereignty, and what you do with that freedom once you get it will be up for Parliament.
And Boris Johnson says it's going to be good for animal rights.
I know, I personally found it, there were two things that jumped out to me. One where he said, before you tell me that Tony Blair will say anything, which did make me laugh, that Boris, a man who wrote 2 different columns about both leaving and staying in Brexit, obviously knows of which he speaks. And then it says, but if we get Brexit right, you know, we will become more humane, liberal and compassionate. Now, I am a huge believer in animal rights, but it did then seem slightly weird to me that he spent the whole rest of the column not talking about human beings, but about calves and lambs.
But it's a big issue. Live animal exports cannot be banned while we're in the EU.
But it's not the biggest issue, Jonathan.
No, it's not.
People aren't voting
Brexit
at all. In order to save
but it's a
calves.
Reminder of the powers that have been ceded to Brussels, which stop a British government doing what it wishes.
There may not be passports for pets, so pets will lose out.
So all these people that want to go to Spain can't take their beloved pet who's had the jab, because now we're not longer allowed to actually move our pets around.
Well, a bilateral agreement can be come to if that's what they want to do.
Because that would be easy, given how long we've spent trying to do the rest of the negotiation.
Well, we're starting from exact the same position, so it should be relatively easy.
OK, we shall see. Thank you both very much indeed. Good to see you both. This is All That